and welcome, Pani. Happy New Year.
Hi, kia ora. Lovely to speak with you. Gosh, I haven't said kia ora out loud for such a long time.
Oh, brilliant.
I wish we were coming together under more, positive, joyful circumstances. But here we are. But Happy New Year. Yeah, nice to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. Now, just for those of us who are geographically challenged and think we have a fair idea of what's going on in the US, you're in New York. How far away are you drive time, for example, to what's happening in Washington?
DC's maybe 4 hours. Don't quote me on that. The US is a huge place, but it's not that close at all. But it's different. It's another state. It's a completely different kind of region. But yeah, I think we sort of started the morning with the celebration of the Georgia seats being flipped and having the first black person being elected to that seat, and then the second seat looking like it was flipped. So it meant that the three different areas of governance within the US are now democratically have a Democratic majority, so the House, the Senate, and the White House, and that's hasn't been like that for apparently about 11 years. So that's really great news, and it means Biden and his team can really get some traction in terms of making some legislative changes and hopefully some progressive policy. But, as soon as we heard that the second seat had been flipped in Georgia, which is a very conservative and historically, Republican state, this madness broke out. And so the kind of news was completely sidelined by it. And having said that, it's really important that we keep in mind that the Democratic victory in 2020 and 2021 is actually still extremely thin, so that the country is really divided. Over 70 million people still voted for Trump. And although even all the three different areas of governance have a Democratic majority, it's hair thin. It's literally just in there. So that's something to keep in mind, that this is a nation that is quite divided along kind of political lines, and sometimes it feels like you're living in two different countries. And it's been, as you know, we've been kind of speaking since I moved here, which was in February 2019. So it's almost 2 years. And I'm really sort of trying to get my head around all the nuances. And it's been extremely educational, as well as, extremely educational and, profoundly just really fascinating, sometimes alarming, sometimes completely concerning. And it's certainly very, very different to what anyone who was born and raised and lives in New Zealand could imagine. I think we sort of see that kind of media image of the US and maybe the Hollywood image and so on, or it's even been used, but being here, living here, it is certainly a very unique and nuanced, complicated, and polarized beast.
Pani, you did it yourself. We hear this so often from media commentators, and I know you're not a media person per se, but we hear about the millions that voted for Trump. What about the 7 million he lost by? And what do you make of it where you are on the ground there, hearing about the news of this ongoing myth that the election fraud has taken place? There is no fraud. That's been told and proven time and time again.
Absolutely
but
not.
Every single chance, Trump takes the chance to have another little dig and incite riots, quite literally.
Yeah, so I think that was one of the things that I was really surprised at today. So initially when I was watching, when a friend of mine called me and was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Working." And he was like, "Turn on the news." And so I'm like, "Okay." And I was like, just absolutely shocked. I felt like I was watching scenes from a movie, like some kind of dystopian film. But at the same time, I think it sort of really speaks to the reality of what's going on here. And although these people are extremists, I think it's important to take that scenario seriously. And, the bedrock of any supposed democracy is the smooth transition between elected officials. And what we kind of saw today was this kind of sort of possibly unexpected but natural progression of the outcomes of what Trump's been doing since the 2020 election results came in. So he refuses to accept the election results. He's stoking lies and falsehood. I've stopped saying misinformation and disinformation because it's literally just lies and falsehood. Conspiracy theories about a stolen election, about election fraud. And, these claims have gone to multiple different courts. They have been thrown out by multiple different judges and discredited the claims, discredited by multiple people, many of whom are Republicans or Republican appointed, who are just there is no evidence. This is absolutely false. But he keeps kind of inciting this rhetoric. And, what happened at the rally today, as a psychologist, I like to kind of analyze these things, and especially as a social psychologist, how do people behave in these ways in large masses or groups. This has been, an area of social psychology for decades, the beginning of social psychology. And, so you've got that kind of background of him spreading this falsehood, the lies, really, as we would say in New Zealand, racking up his supporters. And at the actual rally, so, he was there, he spoke for an hour, and he incited the the protesters to charge the Capitol. And that's where the government is. It's I don't even know how to say it. It's like Jacinda Ardern telling a group of people, maybe she lost the election, telling a group of people to storm the Beehive or the parliamentary building. Mm-hmm. It just is insane. And for that right now, there's talk of impeachment as well as removing her from government for being unfit, which is the 25th Amendment, I believe. And I think one of the things that was most also alarming to me, not just the absolute chaos and shocking and sad, and also undemocratic. This is not what you would expect from a nation which would call itself the bastion and champion of democracy. It's a sort of thing, the kind of division and political unrest and violence and chaos, you're meant to see it somewhere far away, which has an unstable government and is not democratic. So these are the things that kind of, have my mind boggling. But also a few other things that I noticed, besides, Trump really needing to be held responsible for inciting what happened, the government and people in the DC area, the officials in that area, should have been much better prepared. They knew this rally protest was happening. They knew Trump was going to be there. They knew he was going to be winding people up. And they were just way too casual about the security. And I was shocked to see the stark contrast between some of the overly aggressive preparation for the Black Lives Matter protests last year. And, in the same spot, there are images of basically much, much stronger, more aggressive, what would you call it, presence, presence of authorities, making sure that there's a really huge barrier between the demonstrators and the Capitol and so on. Mm-hmm. And then Black Lives Matter is a place where it's actually a legitimate movement with proven concerns about systematic racism that keeps getting Black people killed by police. And so I'm just okay, so this today was a completely fraudulent conspiracy theory, had no basis in reality, and known to have people involved in the group who are extremists, who are, people the authorities keep an eye on. So I think the preparation was just terrible, and it was just too easy to break those barricades. And then even when I guess at that stage, the rioters had not broken the barricade. They were inside the Capitol, they were looting, and the response was pretty mild. And I just think that there has been much more aggressive response to other types of much more peaceful and much more legitimate protests. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that the country will continue to talk about. But I think, and I don't know how much you've heard over there, but they were inside the Capitol. They were inside the chambers. They were in Nancy Pelosi's office. They were rummaging through, trashing her office. They've taken her speaker's podium. Someone looted the podium. I mean, it's chaos. It's out of control. There was a guy with tattoos and some kind of deer skin on him and horns inside this.
Good Lord.
I mean, it was wild. It was something like from Lord of the Flies almost, the adult version. So, yeah, I think, the country's really reeling. I think it's also, without sort of laughing too much, because I think that sometimes it's easy as an outsider to feel like you're quite removed from it. But this really, that imagery and that situation to Americans is extremely painful. It's highly emotional and just really saddening. I think a lot of people are just so shocked and so upset because that's not the country that, they feel like they live in. And it's a scenario that
Pani,
really
this is the bastion of democracy being eroded away by the very person who is currently at the top. So just swinging into a bit of COVID-19 before, because I know you've got to rush off to something else. How have you been coping with COVID-19 and the huge numbers that the US is dealing with there?
Yeah, so I think, we went into lockdown in mid-March, so it's almost a year in, and we've been in various forms of regulations around what we can and can't do, and so we've had a bit of indoor dining. Mostly it's outdoor dining. Everyone still wears masks, so it's very different to what I imagine is going on in New Zealand and when I talk to my friends and family and also see all their lovely holiday photos, Christmas holiday photos on Facebook. It's a very different scene. We're very far away from what the day-to-day reality is for New Zealanders right now. We're definitely in a pandemic still. And I think, I just, again, from an analytical point of view and just kind of sitting here and thinking about it and listening to the experts, overall, I think from the start, I mean, I can tell you overall from the start, at the kind of federal level, the response was way too slow. And then across the states, Trump devolved the responsibility to the individual states. And then the states each have way too uneven an approach to it. So some states enforce mask wearing and social distancing. Some have social distancing with indoor-outdoor dining or have closed shops and restaurants. Some haven't. And so there has been no national strategy. And this is from the beginning of the pandemic. So it's kind of a little bit like it's chaos, I suppose, and different states have different attitudes towards it. So, luckily, New York State, or at least New York City, is the people are relatively responsible. They're mask wearers. They're aware of other people's health and well-being. Others kind of follow the conservative, from the kind of conservative states tend to have more libertarian approaches where they're like, I shouldn't have to wear a mask, don't tell me what to do. And it's interesting because their argument is often my body, my choice, although when it comes to something like abortion, it's definitely not my body, my choice. So anyway, just wanted to throw that hypocrisy out there. But even now that we have a vaccine, the rate of immunization is way too slow. And it's also hindered by anti-vaxxers. And I think, one of the huge issues that we've had is that Trump himself, from the beginning, was a COVID denier. He didn't take it seriously, didn't care about it at all, not interested. That's why he was like, the governors can deal with it. And, and so he's mask phobic, COVID denier, even though when he got it, he's mask phobic. And, that really fueled the spread of misinformation across the U.S. for those who would have the tendency to be skeptic around, the virus and how to keep safe from it. And, I think at the moment, the rates of infection in New York City have doubled in the last month. So we're at 9%, and they were about 4.5% And I think what happened was people travelled between Thanksgiving, which is end of November, and Christmas, which has just been. So that was one of the reasons. But I just want to put it into context. I'm sure all of you in New Zealand know the numbers, but the overall deaths have been almost 360,000. And then over 20 million people in the US have caught COVID. That's 4 times the New Zealand population. Mm. So it's just wild. And, for a country that's ostensibly, affluent, one of the richest economies in the world, I just find it really hard to digest that it's been so difficult to deal with this in a much more constructive manner. And, a lot of it comes down to the leader of the nation. He did not have a countrywide strategy, and this was negligence that no doubt has impacted not only the infection rates but the mortality rates across the country. And and that's another kind of gash in kind of the US psyche right now. There's a lot of difficulty, and I suppose you could call it collective trauma that many people are holding.
Pani, that's not going to change for a while yet, is it? And I know that you're dealing with a lot there, and I really appreciate you being available to talk to us both about what's happening there politically and the virus, which doesn't really give a flying fart who runs a country. So thank you, and I hope to catch up with you again and just keep tabs on you.
Absolutely, lovely to chat to you.
Yeah, you too. Dr. Pani Farvid, thank you. She's a professor of psychology from New Zealand, but now in Manhattan, New York at the New School University. A real plethora of texts coming through. I'll get to those when I can, but keep that feedback coming in and give me a call based on what she said, based on what you've been seeing in the news throughout the day. It's 23 minutes past 8 last night in New York.